So yeah, that's he can write code. He can write code. And I don't know about Jerry. Jerry might be able to. He can tell you probably how it goes if you know Jerry. Yeah, we go way back. So, other than that, yeah, there's a lot of different people. I mean, there's the people that do web presenting and all that kind of stuff and everything too. So everybody has a different category on the third. They're on the third floor in the library. So, yeah.
Like the time oh, good. Like no easy all that stuff.
Yeah.
He stayed there.
What he's talking about. Yeah.
I don't know if the sermon is dumb it down.
Oh, that's yeah.
It's not.
Exactly. Yeah.
I've learned down.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not just that you have to go to that level, it's just that a lot of people don't understand what you're saying. You know, they don't know it, but some of the people, like my husband, would know what you're talking about and this and that. But he could say, I can write code if I wanted to, but he's in a whole different category. You know, he could tell the other people, well, you do your version of what you do, and he can tell you how to, he can tell you everything you need for, like, he's the other end of it. So we're the video end of it. They're the other end of it, because they're writing the code and the stuff for the cables and everything else that's going in that we need. So he understands that part of it too, but he just chose not to go into code. So he was in architecture and engineering up at Texas A&M before we came here. But it's a funny thing too, because he got into math, the higher math, and his dad was on the higher math. His dad was a teacher here, Dr. Harris Peterson. No, engineering. Yes, engineering, technology, and he has a lot of different degrees. Anyway, so when my husband was in Texas, they hire these outside professors, and sometimes they come in and they have from other countries. So if they had hired one from West Honda, nice guy, but he came in and he had such a speech impediment that the students couldn't understand him. So he said, this is the whatever right triangle of the hippopotamus triangle. So my husband was like, and he would have been okay because he hired a student, which could have helped him, but he was kind of like a savant too, so he could tell you, he couldn't tell you how he got the answer, he just tell you the answer. So it wasn't going to help the students understand how they could question how they got the answer. So he just got out of that class and got into some other stuff. Yeah, so and at Texas A&M, they don't hire their own; they hire outsiders. So they hire people that if you went to school here, I don't know if they hire outsiders or not. You know, it's internal. Not usually, but they can here. But at Texas A&M, they won't hire; they just hire outside because they like to bring in fresh blood, is what they call it.
There's no injury.
Yeah, exactly. So that was what the same thing is what they were saying. Yeah. So I get that. Yeah.
There is
So that's right. I was here.
Yes, exactly.
Said I had my master's degree and for about 6 years. So that would be an example.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, it's a teaching school here, so I get it completely. You know. Yeah, they teach their own, and then they, sometimes they get a job here, and sometimes they go on because sometimes they're willing to go to other places. Yeah.
Part of what I got when I was teaching statistics class, senior 4-year-old statistics, and I had worked with, one time I was able to work 10,000
what it is. So they sent out an email no less than 4 people watch 12.
Regular time. I certainly
Yeah, I have to send my calendar.
these shades all. But
Yeah, he's retired. He retired in 2021.
yeah, I think I know who he is.
Yeah. He knows all the higher math and all that stuff. He's got a chemistry degree and I don't know. He works on. He had a lot of different kinds of jobs as far as he worked for the railroad. So he was Texas and railroad place. Or basically they study this.
Okay, sorry. Could folks please take your seats? Good evening, everyone. First, I'll tell you who I am, because I always forget to do that. My name is Peter DeHart. I'm the Associate Provost for Research and Dean of Graduate Studies here at MSU Mankato. Thank you all for being here, and good evening to everybody. I'm happy to welcome you to the 52nd Douglas R. Moore Faculty Research Lecture, an annual tradition that celebrates outstanding scholarly activity of our faculty at Minnesota State Mankato. This event honors the legacy of Dr. Douglas R. Moore, who believed deeply in the power of inquiry, discovery, and the public sharing of ideas. Each year, we recognize one faculty member whose work exemplifies that spirit of intellectual curiosity and commitment to advancing knowledge. Thank you for being here and for supporting faculty research at Minnesota State Mankato. President Inch. It's now my pleasure to welcome President Edward Inch to the stage. Dr. Inch is the 13th president of Minnesota State University Mankato. President Inch has brought strategic collaborative leadership to Minnesota State Mankato, grounded in a commitment to student success and community impact.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you all for coming to the lecture tonight. This is one of my favorite events. I tell people all the time, spring is such an amazing time on a campus because you get to see the culmination of a lot of work that our students are doing. You get to see performances on our stages. You get to see what our athletic teams are doing on the fields. One of the most important things we get to do is celebrate the level of research and scholarship that goes on this campus. The Douglas R. Moore Faculty Research Lectureship stands as one of our university's most meaningful traditions. A moment where we honor a faculty member who has engaged in an activity that demonstrates the quality and excellence of discovery and provides a venue for sharing that knowledge in a manner that enriches the intellectual life of the university and our community. We celebrate a person tonight because that person has done such good things with their research. But there's so much other stuff that goes on a campus that really elevates the entire campus when you look at the body of work that we produce. So we're going to showcase a special event tonight. This lectureship not only recognizes our outstanding research, but it affirms our shared commitment to work that expands knowledge and engages the public in new ways of understanding and thinking about the world. So tonight, we have the privilege of honoring the 2026 Douglas R. Moore Faculty Research Lecturer, Dr. Beth Heidelberg, of the Urban and Regional Studies Institute in the Department of Economics, Ethnic Studies, and Government. One of my favorite opportunities is the opportunity every year when I call the recipient to inform them that they have been chosen, is to have a conversation about their work, their passion, their interests, their students. I had one of the best conversations with her. It was really enriching. And as I've told people, her work is kind of creepy, but really cool. Her work exemplifies how we can illuminate emerging societal issues and offer valuable perspectives for communities and policymakers. Her lecture, Ghosts Among Us, Local Government Support for Dark Tourism in the United States and United Kingdom, explores how local governments navigate the opportunities and complexities that arise when historical tragedy, cultural memory, and economic development intersect. It is thoughtful, it's timely work, and it challenges us to consider how our places reckon with their past and represent those stories to the public. And that's the really cool part. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Heidelberg to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, good evening, excuse me. Good evening, everyone. It is wonderful to see everybody here. There's colleagues, there's family friends that are family, and there's mentors. And it's wonderful to see how our research can reach beyond just the realm of the academic journals that we publish in and actually apply in the real world. So I would like to start by saying, Ghosts Among Us, I love the fact that President Inch called it creepy because it kind of is. And that's the best part about it. It's a subject that nobody really wants to talk about. But in local government, you have to talk about it. If you don't talk about it, it just ends up being unresolved. And so I'm here tonight to introduce you to the concept of dark tourism, talk a little bit about
the roots of it, and talk about how it applies and how it shapes local governments to this day. So dark tourism, you probably heard that phrase before. I mean, and not just here. This is a concept that really nobody's talked about, but it's an ancient practice. And that's the best thing about it. This is something that is not new to the world. It has been practiced since ancient Rome, when the gladiators used to fight in these bloody battles. It's a concept that was used in the medieval times during pilgrimages. Yes, there were religious pilgrimages, and there were pilgrimages to churches and to religious points along the way. But it was also to see the shriveled hand of a religious figure. It was to see the decomposing body of somebody that was important to that particular religion. So there are lots of different practices. And as we move along into the 1600s, 1700s, we started to see public executions like that of Henry VIII and his couple of his wives in there. These things have always attracted people. They've attracted people because they're not common. They're things that you can't talk about. They're things that are just taboo. But we as a collective society have just a little bit of a fascination about them. As we get into the 1800s, we start to see the democratization of tourism in general. We got things like trains. We got people being able to move from one place to another without a lot of problems. We've got shipbuilding that allowed us to go overseas without having to risk the dangers of, drowning and death. So people were able to travel more. They were able to go places that they really hadn't been able to reach prior to that. And that led dark tourism down another path. This path was a little bit more profitable, I want to say. In the lower left, we've got the Belgunnis crime scene. This was one of those Dark Widows situations where a nice little lady had a farm and would advertise for people to come and visit the farm, and then she'd kill them for whatever possessions or money they had. Buried them on the property. Okay, she got discovered, as one is wont to do, and they found a number of bodies on site. Well, the train companies heard about this. And they said, I bet we can make a few bucks if we run special trains out to the Gunnis property. So they started doing special tours to the Belgunnis site, and this is what you see here is the result of that. You can see some of the tourists kind of pointing at the crime scene that was still operational. This was also a problem in the 1880s when you've got the Jack the Ripper crime scene. This is the site of the Annie Chapman crime scene. I believe that was victim number 2. Somebody could correct me on that. Okay, so it's a little courtyard, and this was a very tough time in England. It was a very rough society. But when people realized that the people living in the apartments above the crime scene had a great view of where it happened, they started charging a penny for people to come up into their apartment and look at the crime scene. They charged people to come and visit. People barged into the crime scene and took souvenirs, which, you know how it's not solved to this day? Do we know if somebody ran away with a souvenir or two that could have solved the crime of Jack the Ripper? So dark tourism has always been with us. But what hasn't been with us is the study of dark tourism. The study of dark tourism is actually kind of a new phenomenon. We see the rise of books. We've got writers since the 1990s, only since the 1990s, starting to focus on it as an academic discipline. So we start to see the emergence of books, dark tourism, the darker side of travel. Those are like the ultimate books in this field. We've got journals, academic journals, like the Journal of Heritage Tourism or Tourism Management Perspectives. These are respected peer-reviewed journals. Prior to the 1990s, nobody was publishing about dark tourism as a separate segment of heritage tourism. After that, it's kind of a free-for-all. Recently, Netflix posted a series called The Dark Tourist. I don't know, did anybody watch that? Okay, we got one in the back. They went to some really interesting spots. I mean, I'm going to go back and rewatch that when I have a few minutes, because I got research to do. But this has been such a boom in an academic field that we actually see in England the Institute of Dark Tourism Research. It was started by Philip Stone and Richard Sharpley kind of pioneers in the field. And that's where a lot of the dark tourism research has started. But most of it focuses on the psychology of dark tourism research, on motivations of the visitors, the management, the interpretation of sites, but nobody was looking at local government. And I see some of my local government people here. We know how important it is to look at things from the host community perspective. How does a local government deal with it when you can't talk about it? So that's really the crux of my research. Now I want to go back a few years and kind of explain how I got into this because, yeah, it is a little creepy. But it didn't start. It's not my fault that I got into this. One day, back in the 1980s, my sister came home with a book. She came home with a book called Beware This House is Haunted. This was a book full of stories of real places that had ghosts. It had creepy illustrations that terrified me, and she knew it. She would run around the house chasing me with this book, and I would just freak out. I mean, just the cover art alone was enough to induce 8-year-old nightmares. Heather, can you please stand up? I am giving this to you, and you have to accept it, because all of my colleagues are here, and the president. Okay, can I just say, I just won sibling rivalry. This is the longest game you're ever going to see, and I got April Fool's in too. So thanks to my sister, I realized that there was a connection between dark tourism and real places. But it wasn't that incident alone that I had obviously very carefully repressed. But in 2008, my husband and I were talking about where to go on our honeymoon. And, you know, we threw around like Disneyland. Let's go on a cruise. No, I don't really want to do that. We went to Boston. Love Boston. Boston's a great city. But during that trip, we decided to kind of toddle on up to Salem for, you know, just to check it out. Because I'm a history buff. He's interested in history. We just kind of explored. But as we're exploring, we're walking along these narrow little streets. And I'm thinking, what do the people who live here think about these tourists that are coming here very clearly for the witch trial stuff? And granted, they have a lot of different things to explore and a lot of different avenues to wander. But what is it like to live in a city that's best known for a terrible, terrible thing that happened? This was the genesis of the actual dark tourism research. So a little bit of childhood trauma, a little bit of honeymoon fun, and here we are. So as I was looking through, preparing for this research, it became very clear that tourism itself, extremely profitable industry. The U.S. Travel Association noted that it is a $1.3 trillion a year venture. Now that's direct tourism, but it's also supplemental businesses, hotels, gas stations, little souvenirs, little gift shops that maybe aren't really directly related to the tourism site, but people, you know, go and buy like a little purse that says St. Thomas, or buy like little things, little turtles to pass out to their friends. And I'm smiling because that's exactly what my children did on our last trip. But these supplemental services are all part of that economy. 15 million people are employed directly in the tourist industry and related fields. This is a significant amount of revenue for the United States. And this is in 2024. This is post-COVID numbers now. In Great Britain, we're also seeing a proportionally large amount of revenue as well. 127 billion pounds, which translates to roughly about 171 billion US dollars. They're employing 3.9 million people, 1.2 million directly in the tourism industry. This is a cottage industry that's employing people, and it's something worth studying and understanding. But that is not dark tourism specifically. This is just all tourism of pretty much every kind. Dark tourism as an industry unto itself is one of those things that is cross-sectional. It is multi-generational. You've got people, you know, as long as they can stand upright and as long as they don't have to get out of their stroller too much, the whole range of ages engages in dark tourism. Some people don't even recognize it as dark tourism. When you go to New York City, you might go to the 9/11 memorial because a lot of us remember that day, what happened, and how horrible it was. Well, in dark tourism circles, that is one of the places that is very significant because it shows a cross-section of a lot of families coming together for memorialization. The Cambodian killing fields, those two, they've been turned into a museum to educate people about what happened and how can we prevent it from happening again. Pripyat, Ukraine, Chernobyl nuclear incident. Now people are going to that city, even though it's not kind of an official tourism site. They don't really want people in there, allegedly, and yet you still see a lot of tour groups going through. And I Am Village. This is one of those places that I want to get back to and continue my research because this was a plague village in the 1600s that closed itself off entirely from the world. And now they've turned it into kind of a museum site to explain how they tried to manage amongst these tourists who are interested in the site. But Wolf, not an academic study. I got to make all you academics in there like, well, what was the methodology? He just did a survey. But he surveyed 937 people, and 82% of them said that they have visited a dark tourism site at some point. Cities large, cities small have dark tourism. The problem is, large cities, when you get dark tourism, it's often as part of a larger trip. When you talk about dark tourism in smaller cities like I Am Village or Pripyat, usually that's the destination. They might visit a few other places and a few restaurants and whatnot, but the dark tourism is kind of the main point. So I started looking into motivation. And again, I take a look at the Wolf study, which is non-academic, compared to an academic study that had a sample size of 933 people. They came up with basically the same conclusion. People wanted to learn about the incident. They wanted to learn about that dark tourism incident that became the catalyst to that tourism industry. So I'm not going to go through all of these. Just know that people wanted to learn. The educational component of dark tourism is the draw for many people. This is not the first time I've studied dark tourism in some form. How many of you have seen my other lectures? One was just a few years ago. Okay, I'm seeing pockets of people. I have studied this topic since about 2014. Yeah, it's been that long. I've done prior studies in Salem, Massachusetts, and Clear Lake, Iowa. I've chosen those cities because they have managed to navigate this very awkward, very taboo subject extremely successfully. They have made millions of dollars of revenue based on their dark tourism. Okay, that's great, but it's also a little weird. I mean, is that exploitation? That's the question that I was trying to look at. But what I found was they approached it with such a level of respect. They had reverence for the people who died. They were explaining how it fit into the general context of the time. Clear Lake presented it as a lesson in music history. They have based an entire musical industry in Clear Lake based off of that Buddy Holly, J.P. Richardson, and Ritchie Valens plane crash. That plane crash, prior to that, the musicians had no relationship to that city. They were just there for a concert tour. But after that crash, people from all over the world were visiting Clear Lake. They were spending their money in the restaurants. They were spending their money in the hotels. The city said, you know what? People are coming here. They want to learn. They want to understand. They want to see where it happened. So let's educate them. Let's provide some information on what Buddy Holly and Ritchie Valens and J.P. Richardson, what did they contribute to music history? Much less like the case of Salem. They took the witch trials of 1692 and turned it into an educational opportunity. They were able to present it as, this was really a bad idea and you shouldn't persecute people because it's a terrible thing to do. And they put it into a lesson. And then the private sector got involved and decided to add, you know, we're going to just have this little cottage industry of witchcraft and the occult too. And so you had kind of competing interests. But one thing the city did was maintain its integrity by focusing on the injustice of it, in the victimization of the people who died in those trials, and they managed to make a success of that industry. That house that you see in the lower left, that is owned by the city. They purchased it in, I want to say, the 60s or 70s. I'd have to double check that. But they've turned it into a museum. They turned it into a museum to explain the context of 1692 and what were the conditions that allowed this hysteria to happen. So they are active participants in their dark tourism industries. And that's where cities can get involved in dark tourism. First, they can work with the primary sites. The primary sites are the sites where things happened. In the upper left, you've got the Buddy Holly crash site. This is still privately owned. There's a farmer who owns that field, but he allows literally anybody to come and walk into the field and see where that crash happened. Right now, that memorial with the glasses, it's not really owned by the farmer. It's not really owned by the city. It's just kind of a tribute that somebody put up, and they're like, hey, that works. So this is how we've got private, not interference, but involvement in dark tourism. On the lower right, you see the Salem witch trials. This is where the current evidence points to the hangings actually taking place. It's behind a Walgreens or CVS. Yeah, some little drugstore. And they found evidence of the hanging site, and they built a memorial around this. And that was actually pretty recently, because they thought it was a little bit up the hill, but now they're changing their mind on that. But what happened with this is that the city, again, became involved in the memorialization. They became involved in creating this memorial and dedicating it to the people who died in that site. Now, the secondary sites, those are sites that are not directly involved in the actual tragedy that occurred on that dark tourism site. Dark tourism, again, being the site of tragedy, accidents, mass death, and in some cases folklore, which is always kind of the fun version of dark tourism. You can do a little bit more with that as a city, but in this case, the secondary sites were created by the secondary site in Clear Lake was created by the city. They did it with such respect and reverence that Richie Valens' family donated thousands of dollars to have that site put up. Buddy Holly's family came to the ceremony to open it. J.P. Richardson's family has been involved in the memorialization since they started doing things for it. These secondary sites have another reason other than just adding another memorial. It gets people out, away from the primary sites, which is often the reason that they go and visit these places. It gets them out into the community to experience other things in the community. That's a very strategic method of involving the city, involving the residents, getting them out and interacting. So all of this kind of led up to the study that I'm working on right now. Last summer, 2024, I had an opportunity through the Minnesota State University Faculty Research Grant to go over to Lockerbie, Scotland. Now, who can tell me what happened in Lockerbie, Scotland? You guys already know, so I'm not going to call on you. Yeah, it seems that just about everybody remembers Pan Am 103. Took off from Heathrow Airport in December of 1988, got about halfway into the flight, and a terrorist bomb ripped it apart over the city of Lockerbie. Now, when I went to Lockerbie, it was a wonderful little community. I mean, this was a rural community in every sense. And when I was talking with the city officials, they said, we like it this way. I asked them, well, you know, you would have more tourists if you guys kept things open at night. And Simon looked at me and said, we just don't want to. It was a business decision on the part of the business community that they don't want to be a tourist destination. Every time something happens in the criminal case, every time a new documentary or a show comes out about it, which there was a show about it pretty recently, they get visitors again. When I was there, I went up to across from where the fuselage came down, and there was just this random person, and I asked them, do you have a connection in the community? And he said, no, I just saw something online and I felt like I had to come. Likewise, I was in another place, and it was just kind of a quiet plaza, and there was a couple just sitting there quietly, and I asked them, are you from here? And they said no, and I got the sense that they didn't really want to talk and that something may have already occurred. I didn't follow through with them, because sometimes even when you're a researcher, you got to know the boundaries. So Lockerbie is a wonderful community, ancient sheep herding community, until the Pan Am 103 plane crash. Everything changed for them. That night, people started watching TV after dinner. They heard a huge boom. And then they obviously didn't know what it was. They thought the petrol station had blown up. But they started feeling the debris and started feeling pieces of the plane coming down. The wing and the engine flew into the Sherwood Crescent neighborhood, killing 11 Lockerbie residents. It was a terrible disaster. And here are some of the primary sites. You've probably seen many of these pictures before. The picture on the left is where the wing came down and cut into a neighborhood, killing the 11 Lockerbie residents. The center picture is of the town hall. That's still standing. The window in the middle is to this huge open space. It's a beautiful building. I'm an architectural historian, and this thing is just amazing. I wish we had stuff just like that. But the town hall is where they put the victims as they found them. And that was obviously a horrible thing because they didn't have a morgue big enough to handle this big of a disaster. The roads were cut off, the water was cut off, the phone service was cut off. They had to have emergency crews coming in from other places. The emergency crews had no idea what they were doing because they didn't know the depth of what had happened. And then the picture on the right is probably one of the most famous ones from the site. This was in a farmer's field, a sheep field across from a church, Tundergarth Church. The nose cone came down. There was a little farm right next to it. The farmer came out to see if he could rescue people. Now, if you can imagine what it's like to go out in the dark of a December night and try to help people who are far beyond help. It was traumatizing for this man. And there's more stories out of that, but out of respect for them, I won't be going into those. But the primary sites were preserved. The city of Lockerbie, even though they wanted to keep their community kind of a small town community, they understood the significance of what happened. They turned the Sherwood Crescent site on the lower left into a memorial plaza. That's where I encountered those two people who were just sitting quietly. The town hall, they replaced the big window that overlooked the morgue with a stained glass window and a flag that represented every nation that lost somebody in the crash. What I didn't realize until recently is that for those of us from Forest Lake, that's my hometown, there was somebody on the plane from Forest Lake. So that was kind of astounding to find out as I was researching this. And then the fuselage, that's still private property. That still is owned by the same farmer who discovered the plane. For years, he would not talk about it. Pan Am tried to give him money in appreciation for what he did. He said, I won't take this money. This is what anybody should have done. So this was obviously a very traumatic site. And these sites have been preserved and acknowledge what happened without being overt about it. They do have secondary sites now, though. In the church across from the field where the fuselage came down, there's this little church. This is Tundergarth Kirk, the Scottish word for church. And that little outbuilding you see right there, they turned that into a hall of remembrance for the victims. They have pictures of every victim that they were able to get together. They have a biography in this huge 3-ring binder and now on a computer because, they wanted to modernize it. It's a very small memorial, but it's extremely poignant when you walk in there because it's very quiet. It's in this little stone building that's kind of away from everything, and you step outside and you can see the field where the fuselage came down. The secondary site, a little farther away, is at Drifesdale Cemetery, the more groomed-looking one. That has the name of all the victims of the Lockerbie disaster. Each year they hold a memorial service there, and sometimes royalty comes out to lay a wreath, but each year they invite Syracuse University parents. Syracuse University lost 35 students in that plane crash. Now, in a community as big as MSU, losing 35 of your students would be devastating. Losing one of our students is devastating. Losing 35 at one time would be crushing. So these secondary sites give people another place to go to learn about the crash, to memorialize the victims, and it gets them out into the community beyond those primary sites. There is a little controversy because up at the Tundergarth Church, there's a group that wants to do a museum. They want to put together a museum of remembrance. But in Lockerbie, you've got a faction of people who are really not that thrilled about talking about it. They think the past should be the past. And there's a group that wants memorialization. When I went over there, I was sitting in a pub and somebody heard my American accent, and so they started asking me questions. There were 3 guys. They were already 3 sheets to the wind, so it was very easy to get them to talk. And 2 of them told me their story. They were there that night. They heard what happened. They heard the bomb go off. They saw the debris. They helped with the cleanup. They told me lots of stories. And then there was a 3rd guy, a younger guy named Jamie. And he's like, nah, I'm not going to talk about it. Imagine that in a really tough Scottish brogue that I had to like interpret. It was very tough. But he was not there. And apparently that's very common. The people who were there want to talk about it, and the people who were not there, they just want it to be, yes, that's part of our history, but let's move on. But that got me thinking, how are people memorializing and being part of this dark tourism phenomena? Now, as an urban planner, as somebody who's studied public administration, we know that involvement usually means some sort of documentation and some sort of way to clarify exactly how you're going to participate. So I wanted to take a look at, are they supporting this industry that could be large? Are communities providing financial assistance, and are they writing it into urban planning policy? So my approach, I selected 100 dark tourism communities. This was a pilot study, so I wanted a nice, easy number to work with to see if there was any merit to my original hypothesis that probably they don't. I chose 50 dark tourism communities from the USA, 50 from the British Isles. I selected communities under 125,000 in population. And that's because those are the ones that probably are only dealing with dark tourism. I mean, when people go to those cities, it's probably because of the dark tourism, and maybe there's a couple other sites that they go to. It's not like New York City where you're going to go to the Ground Zero, but you're also going to go see the Statue of Liberty and maybe catch a show and maybe go to Central Park. I mean, there's a big difference in how cities manage this. And then I chose communities that had the event happen within jurisdictional boundaries. If it happened in unincorporated lands, they're probably not going to write it into a local policy. So I wanted to make sure that the cities I chose had the policies ready to go. I looked at, for the financial end of things, budgets, statements of accounts. I looked in the planning side and the comprehensive plans and the strategic plans and small area plans. And then I got to work and started coding these things. I used, for you statisticians, the one who's been helping me out is in the back there. Hi, Scott. I used a summative content analysis looking at both latent and manifest coding elements. I had to create the categories based on my experience as an urban planner to determine kind of a baseline, and then I was able to add well, mostly add, because I'm not going to take away categories if there's already somebody in there. So I can go into the methodology more, but let's just move on to the results to make sure we are keeping on time. The coding and categorization was based on local government practices. The problem is, of course, if somebody tries to repeat the study, because in academia you want to have a theory that's testable and repeatable, but local government doesn't work like that. They change everything on almost an annual basis. So trying to repeat the study, and when I was doing peer review, they were like, well, can we repeat it? I'm like, I really hope so. So the dynamic in local government is a little bit odd when they are your sample. They change their policies, they change their budgets. Communities change. They're a growing animal. So I'm just going to go through my findings quickly, but they are going to be published. They're going to be published in the Journal of Tourism and Hospitality. That's probably going to be within the next 6 months or a year, but it's under review right now, so wish me luck. But what I found is that only 5% of my sample had dark tourism as a delineated, financial, supported thing. You will not be surprised as to who that was. But I wanted to also point out that there was a substantial number of cities that didn't post their budgetary documents, so I had to exclude them from that study. But what I found is there were 5, just 5. I Am Village, that plague village I told you about, Wicklow Town that has a jail, a historic jail that's now a museum, Natchez, Mississippi, Mississippi, the center of enslavement, the center of the Rhythm nightclub fire, the Museum of African American History and Culture. They have exhibits to highlight some of these tragedies, and these are not primary locations, but it is a good secondary location to kind of learn about that background. Salem, of course, has it in their budget because they own an extant property, and that's kind of rare. You don't find that a whole lot. They own and operate it, and so, of course, it's going to be in their budget because they obviously support that industry. And then Truckee, California. You may have heard of the Donner Party. They do a lot of memorialization, and they actually want to keep that roadway visitor-friendly. So in the financial documents, my theory was right. It is not heavily supported. Only 5% of that 100 sample. Is that going to hold true when I expand the sample? I don't know. On the urban planning front, we found basically the same thing. There were more communities that included dark tourism in their plans. That was an interesting finding. These would be things like infrastructure plans and transportation plans, and as many plans as I could get my hands on because they're all part of a comprehensive development system. The British Isles had more dark tourism in their urban planning documents than the USA had. If you look at the totals here, the purple represents dark tourism not specified or not called out. One of the things that I want to research further is whether or not generalized heritage tourism chapters in those comprehensive plans, do they include dark tourism or not? Don't know yet because they don't mention it. You have to kind of go ask them, but they're not going to just pop it in there. But more cities do not include their dark tourism major point of interest than do, and that's kind of what we're getting at. So I, again, am not going to go through all this, but if you want a copy of this presentation, I do have cards and I can send it to you very easily. But the purple bars represent the cities that had heritage and cultural preservation and tourism as an economic development factor. So heritage preservation, great. Tourism, great. But not dark tourism called out as a special thing, even though it's probably their primary draw. The green elements are really what we're going to focus on here. There were 5 categories of urban planning comprehensive plan topics where I found dark tourism called out specifically. Developing no-build areas or build with sensitivity areas, looking at plans for aesthetic and design, transportation infrastructure, enhanced community connections with dark tourism site, and finally, and this was the one that really surprised me, tourism as a means for economic development activity. Only 10.1% of the cities included it in an economic development plan. Now we see with Salem and Clear Lake, and there are many other examples, that it can be an economic development boom for a community. But only 10.1% want to include it in their plans. So this is where I want to explore a little bit more. Why aren't they putting it in their economic development plans? What are they going to do in the future to enhance those economic development plans? And is there a way they can learn from Clear Lake and Salem and the cities like that to make it a respectful industry? Now, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through the breakdown, but what I want to do is say that the research indicated that cities that had their dark tourism that was based on folklore, they tended to include it a lot more. You're going to have like a Sleepy Hollow. I mean, the Headless Horseman, who doesn't want to use that in their tourism industry? In fact, their city brand is the Headless Horseman, and he's literally decapitated. So this is something that they're able to play with. Who has heard of Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado? All right, so everybody all together. What's the thing about that? The Shining by Stephen King. Oh man, that has drawn a lot of people to that community. It's a great book. But yeah, it's creepy. But they can use it. They have an entire economic development and renovation plan for just the Stanley District. And yes, it's a historic hotel. Yes, it's a great hotel. But would it have been as called out? Would it have been as famous or as popular if Stephen King hadn't written that creepy little book? Probably not. Oh, I should mention too, the other places that were mentioned in at least 4 of the 5 categories, folklore was mentioned in all 5. The next one was like jails, institutions, and places where people were involuntarily incarcerated. And those places tended to be operating as museums now. You've got things like the Stewart's Indian Schools in Nevada or the Wicklow Jail, places that weren't intended to be traumatizing or torturous or, nobody was intended to die in these places, but they did. And we see that some of those practices were wrong by our own standards today. Back then, they were innovative. So we have museums kind of saying, we tried this and it really didn't work, so let's remember the people who lost their lives in this experiment. Okay, that was the second highest rate of inclusion in comprehensive plans. So just kind of summing up those findings, sites associated with incarceration, hospitalization, natural disasters, and man-made accidents. Things where the death was not intentional, not the whole point of the place. Those appeared in 55.6 of the comprehensive plans that had dark tourism specified in them. Graveyards and ghosts, I call it, that would be like the folklore, that would be the fun places, the theme parks, the Alnwick Poison Garden pictured here. The places you go to kind of get creeped out a little bit, but it's okay because everything's fine. And then the least appearance of dark tourism was in things associated with horrors and warfare. Genocide, it didn't show up at all. Typically, those things are going to be in the outskirts of a city, or the city doesn't really want to address them themselves, and you'll see a more national government, maybe a regional or a national government involved in those, so it's very rare to find those in the cities. Homicides, too. You're not going to find a lot of museums dedicated to a specific homicide. It's going to be something that a lot of cities aren't going to capitalize on because it's such a personal thing. It was one of their community members that was horrifically murdered, and they don't want to capitalize on that because that is exploitative. There's not a lot of educational value you can get aside from don't encounter a serial killer. So what this means for dark tourism theory, and when you're in academia, that's kind of the important thing. You have to contribute new ideas and a new theory. Well, it was always kind of a hypothesis, but now we have data to prove that despite the potential economic benefits of dark tourism, communities are overwhelmingly not involving it in long-range planning or financial policy documents. In other words, they don't want to get involved. Okay, I mean, that's a choice, but that also it kind of opens up a whole new realm of research. Why not? Is it that they have political issues? Is it that they don't want to deal with the educational element, or they don't want to deal with the interpretive element? So really what I want to do in the future is explore that why. I've got a few people in psychology who are kind of interested in this. Dr. Emily Stark, who is actually a better promoter of my work than I am. She's been talking about it. I'd love to bring her on the team and get into the psychology behind why these cities don't want to get involved. So why does it matter? Well, I used to work for cities. A lot of us used to work for cities. Miriam, I see you back there. You ran cities too. Councils, and I'm sure you'll agree with this statement, that councils and city staff look to precedent. They don't want to do the new scary things that might get them charged with exploitation and being ghoulish. So understanding how dark tourism is used and applied in policy gives them that precedent. It gives them a chance to say, hey, yeah, not everybody's doing it, but the cities who have done it right are doing very well. So it gives them a chance to look at how to manage tourism. And it also gives cities a chance to have a voice in the tourism. It doesn't say to the private sector that they can't be involved in tourism. It doesn't take it over. It complements it. It supplements it. It ends up being a way to work collaboratively with the private sector or the nonprofit sector. And finally, tourism revenue can be used for infrastructure, public services, and to better the community. It's not like the pot of money is just going to go sitting there. It would be used to make life better for the residents. And that's what local government is trying to do through planning and comprehensive planning and financial planning. We see this in New Orleans and Katrina, with Hurricane Katrina. The lower Ninth Ward was wiped out in that hurricane. Well, one of the literature elements that I read, this author went to the Ninth Ward as things were cleaning up because he had family there. And as he was there, a tour bus came with people stepping out and taking pictures. And he was kind of, I mean, obviously, they're still grieving. They are literally cleaning up the mess. And he talked to the people and said, well, how do you feel about this? The people that he talked to said, well, we don't like it. It's kind of like being on display at our worst possible time. But we also understand that the money generated is going to help us rebuild. So it's kind of this push-pull. There's no right answer. It has to be customized to the community. So here's the secret. If you're going to become involved in dark tourism as a local government, you got to think ahead. First off, you look at a city like Amityville. Is anybody familiar with the Amityville horror? Yeah, I've seen a lot of nodding heads. Okay, you're probably aware then that before any of the stories of the bleeding walls and the red-eyed pig and whatever in that house, before that happened, there was a homicide. The eldest son of a family killed his parents and his 4 siblings. So the DeFeos had been murdered. The Lutzes moved in, and then all these demonic stories started coming. Okay, point is, the city hated this. They said it was exploitative, that it never happened, and we really wish people would just leave us alone, because frankly, the people who are coming here to see this, they're kind of freaks. Okay, fair enough, because I've heard stories about people knocking on the door at 2 a.m. wanting to see where it happened. That's just bad manners, so don't do that. But no matter what you do, ignoring it's not going to make the tourists go away. So you can ignore them all you want, they're still coming. So how do you deal with it? You can do active refusal, like Amityville. Just flat out deny, just don't talk about it, send people away. You can do passive memorialization, kind of like Lockerbie did, but you also have Weymouth in England. They were the first known site of the Black Plague. Okay, they put out a plaque, and that's kind of how they address it. They don't really have big museums. They don't really have these big examples and big monuments. This is it. You've got active participation. You've got Salem, who has that witch house as a memorial. They do events. They have a Salem Witch Trials Memorial next to a cemetery. You've got I Am Village, who has a museum of the houses that were involved in the quarantine. And you have Clear Lake, who holds events and who built that 3 Stars Plaza. And then you have a hybrid, Lockerbie and Mankato. Mankato has Reconciliation Park right down by the river. That's a passive memorial that people can go and visit at their leisure. They can read the names of the Native Americans who were executed there in 1862. They can learn a little bit about the story as they wander, and then that buffalo represents an attempt at reconciliation. And then there's activities with the Native American community that focuses on reconciliation and working together. And my colleague Paul here knows a lot more about that than I do. But it is an attempt to take a very difficult time in Mankato's past and try to move on from it while still memorializing what happened and not ignoring it. Lockerbie, too, has that hybrid. At Tundergarth Church, at Dreyfusdale Cemetery, they have that beautiful monument, but then they have an annual event. It's one time a year, and then it gets quiet again. The secret to successful dark tourism is education. It's not telling the story that the market wants. It's not bending the story to make it more sensational and more tourist-friendly. It's providing evidence-based context. You want to tell what happened based on the evidence that we have right now and put it into context. This is how this tragic thing happened. This is what the community was like. This is what the story is behind that big, scary narrative. It presents that context and that narrative in a way that people can appreciate, and it's respectful. With the exception of those ghosts and graveyards thing. I mean, Stanley Hotel, that's just going to be fun no matter what you do. The Headless Horseman, you're not going to have a very serious museum about that. It's just fun. And the thing is, it doesn't have to be either or. Having local government participating in dark tourism in a very educational way doesn't mean the private sector can't do it too. You're not getting rid of that factor. You're just making sure that the tale that should be told is also getting out there. So market forces may lead to sensationalization. And in the case of the Lizzie Borden, now bed and breakfast, where you can stay in the murder room, it's a little bit out there. There were figurines and buttons, golf balls, and kind of horrifying that there was an actual replica axe with little bloodstains on it. A city, a local government, I would hope, would not do that. So dark tourism can be an economic benefit if it's done right, if it's done quietly, if it involves the family of the victims, the members of the community, and the stakeholders that were most traumatized by it. Don't leave them out. You're not going to get total agreement on how things should be memorialized and what stories should be told, but you might be able to start collecting ideas and try to get something that at least gives people a place to go for memorialization. We see some of these examples: Ground Zero, the memorial for Columbine High School shooting, the Flight 103 Place of Remembrance at Syracuse University. Syracuse and Lockerbie are actually very solid partners. Lockerbie sends students over to Syracuse on scholarships, and then in the lower, I'm just making sure I have my direction. And the lower right, we see Grenfell Towers. Right now, that memorialization process is underway. That was a fire that happened in Kensington, UK, that took out pretty much an entire high-rise and most of its residents. Nobody's going to agree entirely on the final design. But no matter how a local government approaches it, the one word that should always be the core is respect. These were people, these were citizens, these were residents, these were friends and family. These were people who mattered. Holcomb, Kansas, where the in cold blood Clutter murders took place, they know that they were famous because of those murders. The city knows that people are coming to Holcomb to see where it happened. They created a secondary site. They created a plaza with a large plaque that told the story of Herb Clutter, of Bonnie Clutter, of Kenyon and Nancy. They talked about what they contributed to the community. They mentioned at the very end that they lost their lives in a robbery attempt. That's all they said. They did not focus on the last few minutes of their life. They focused on what they gave before that moment. And that's what the Room of Remembrance is trying to do at Tundragarth Church. You can see the inside of that building. It's very modest, but it has every picture that they were able to collect. You've got the victims of Flight 103 on the left, and then the 11 members of the Lockerbie community on the right. And you can see the computers in the books. But what really struck me when I was walking around with the reporter, it was a reporter that kind of showed me around, she went to both of those grave sites. There's Helga, especially, that story touched her so much. She always walks past it and says hello to Helga. Says, every time I come up here, I want to say hi to Helga. So these people are being remembered, and that's successful dark tourism, when they're remembered for who they were and not how they died. So I just wanted to give a special thanks to the Faculty Research Grant Program. They have been absolutely invaluable in all of my studies. So thank you for those who provide that. There's so many people to thank. I'm not going to go through this list, but it's friends and family and colleagues, and people have just been amazingly supportive of this research. And it's been something that's fascinated me now for decades. And I plan to continue, although, Heather, you better not give me that book back. So help me. And with that, I would like to take some questions, if you have any. I'm going to send Dr. DeHart around with the microphone.
Hello. Thank you for the presentation. 1 week ago tonight, we attended the play over at the MSU Theater, Lizzie the Musical. And it's about Lizzie Borden. And I've been curious throughout your presentation about the relationship or correlations between fictional tragedies, real tragedies. Lizzie was accused but acquitted. And then it turns out her house was used as a museum. I'm not sure what they've done with that, but now it's a play. And so would you address the correlation between media, plays, fiction, nonfiction? You mentioned The Shining, but anything more?
Yeah. The Borden case is really interesting because it was a real case where 2 people lost their lives. It technically is unsolved. A lot of people believe Lizzie did it. She was acquitted. And yes, the house is now used as a bed and breakfast, and you can stay in the rooms where the murders happened. It's something, all right. But now it's grown into a cultural phenomenon. There was a TV show produced about it, a fictional version of what happened, and obviously the play is fictional as well. So it's kind of gone beyond what happened, and now it's in the cultural zeitgeist. And I think that's what happened with Amityville. It moved on from the actual tragedy that happened, and now it's a huge thing. It's bigger than that, and I don't honestly see that stopping anytime soon because with the proliferation of the internet, anybody can make up a story about anything, and now they're turning it into musicals.
Thank you, Beth. I can't imagine what bedtime stories are like at your house.
They don't seem too traumatized.
But I'm wondering if you have a feel for this. Is there any mystique with the events lost when the event is institutionalized by either government or the private sector? We all kind of like to go and discover these scary, creepy things and think that we've discovered it, and other people aren't aware. But do you have a feel for that at all?
That actually would make another field of study altogether, because like urban exploration, you see that on YouTube all the time, people investigating these creepy places where things may have happened. It seems to be more prolific. People want to find these things, and it's almost like once they become part of a local government plan, it removes that and turns it into a lesson. And as my children remind me, sometimes we don't want to learn all the time. We want to just be entertained. So there is something to that. I think that's actually a pretty important point. Fortunately, there's lots of places to explore yet, but yeah, I think you've got a good point there, that there are lots of places that actually wouldn't benefit much from local government involvement.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting. And I was wondering, is there research, or is it even, I don't even know if it matters, but is there a time frame that makes it easier for, when I was looking at things that happened so long ago that the people, like Lockerbie, people are still there that remember it, versus Salem witch trials where they don't. Is there research that shows where it becomes easier for towns or urban planning or the community to decide to do something?
Yeah, that is a good point. As living memory dies out, it does become a little bit easier to tell the story because you don't have people there to say, no, that's not what it was like for me. You have a much more narrowed point of view because you only have so many stories to work with. But in the cases like Lockerbie, every citizen has their own story. Everyone experienced the tragedy differently, and that's how you find this conflict and how you memorialize. So when you start getting those conflicts, it's really hard to get out of that quagmire. You want to tell everybody's story, but at ground zero, there were thousands of people. They couldn't tell everybody's story. And then you get people who are offended when their story can't be told. So yeah, the more time that goes by, the easier it becomes. But that also kind of narrows down the size, because some stories kind of fade away. Not too many people have actually heard of the Belle Gunness story. I really hadn't until I started doing this. But it was obviously important enough where they were running trains to this site. So the stories that have longevity, those are the ones that are going to be probably the most likely to be in a local government plan.
Thanks, Ben. This was just a really fascinating talk.
Okay, you're in the shadow.
I just wanted to ask about, I was thinking about this a little bit when you sort of got to the end and we're talking a bit about sort of that why it's, a next step for your research, which sounds so interesting and promising. But I was thinking about this too, in the sort of ethnographic nature of so much of what you were sharing with us about, what's sort of on the ground in terms of how people are thinking about and making sense of these events, and then how to represent and memorialize them. And I know you were talking about sort of those why questions from a kind of psychological perspective, and I of course wouldn't discount Emily or the field of psychology. That's certainly worth pursuing.
Right.
But as a sociologist,
Yes.
I'm also thinking about questions of like culture.
Right.
And I'm thinking about the ways, and I'll confess, I have sociology friends here among me who know more about this than I do. But I know, there's so much variation cross-culturally in terms of how we think about death, for example, that's necessarily tragic, or how we think about life. And I'm just wondering, in the work that you've done in these fields, or even in the sort of literature that you've read and reviewed, is there a sense that, there's part of this decision-making draws on cultural repertoires, right? Cultures give us language and ways of thinking and talking about these, that some might lend itself more, right, to this sort of memorialization, and some might not. So I know it's a big question, but like, what aspects, culture, might be there,
Tell you
if
what,
that makes sense.
it's huge.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I did England and the US is because culturally, there's a lot of crossover. My expanded study, when I take this on a more global level, I plan on including Asian countries, African countries, South America. I already have seen literature about Japan, thinking about Hiroshima. They don't think of it in the same terms that we do. Interpreting that site has been a challenge because you've got the tourist community coming in from Europe and from America that's like, well, that once we dropped the bomb, that ended the war. You got the Japanese perspective that's like, yeah, but you dropped it on civilians, not cool. But their perspective is, Hiroshima doesn't want to be defined by that bomb. They consider themselves Phoenix tourism, not dark tourism. They've been obliterated and they rose from the ashes even stronger. So there is very much a cultural perspective. And if that's an area that any of the sociologists want to team up on, I would be thrilled to include and widen the study. And who knows, we could have a second Dark Tourism Institute at MSU. Get a hold of me. Hello.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you so much for your presentation. My question, I think it's at the elementary level, understanding dark, is that dark tourism?
Yeah.
But I think the word dark throws me off a little bit.
Yeah.
So the question, listening and seeing the presentation, is dark just based on disaster? Is dark based on historical things that happened even in our current situation in our country? Because we have sites that did experience some darkness, let me use that word, in terms of the historical context of our country with slavery, and we have those historical places. Will those places fit this narrative as part of the study, or will those be looked on a different lens?
Truth be told, dark tourism is just kind of a popular term for this. The term that's used in academic study of it is thanatourism. So fortunately, they don't tend to have kind of this color spectrum. It's more of a spectrum of death versus, the fun fear factories. But as a perspective of bringing in things like slavery, yes, that's a very critical part of these studies. It's important to understand that where things were happening, that it wasn't just found in one location. So yeah, if I'm answering the question correctly, the terminology is more of a standardized thing, and I think thanatourism is a much more accurate terminology for it, but it's less approachable. So they're kind of going with this right now. But yeah, it does need to be expanded, and that's one of the reasons I want to take this study globally, because I think there's a lot of sites associated with these larger scale problems, genocide, slavery, the things that have impacted greater communities. So unfortunately, I don't have a definitive because there's so much more to explore. I think this is one of the first times we've seen local government being considered as part of dark tourism, and I think there's just sociological perspectives of local government involvement. I mean, this is the literature. I ran across maybe 5 studies that actually addressed city involvement, local government involvement in dark tourism. We're one of them, and we're probably the first one that actually takes it away from a case study level. But there's more to do. If you want to join the team too, I'm all in. Well, if there are no more questions, I think we've come to the conclusion. I'll be out at the reception, and I will have cards if you want to get a copy of the presentation, or if you want to ask more questions on email. That was a lot of fun.
Tell. I'm thinking, you could be for dark tourism, photos is for the tourism.
That's what I'd love to do. See if there's a grant.
That was fantastic. I think she deserves another. I was thinking I've gotten to go to 5 of these. I've been here 5 years, so I've gotten to go to 5 of these, and they're so different. And you learn so much about the different passions that we have on our campus. I think that's really something important that we get to embrace, because I think it gives a sense of the richness of the inquiry that goes on in this campus. So now, I would like to announce the 2027 Douglas R. Moore Faculty Research Lectureship Award, and it will be presented by Dr. Keenan Harted in the Department of Biological Sciences. Dr. Harted will present his lecture in a spring 2027 event for our campus community, and the title of the presentation will be Prime Time: Supercharging Patient Immune Cells to Kill Cancer. Very different than this one. I'm looking forward to it. Now, normally, I would ask him to stand and be recognized, but he's on sabbatical this semester and is not here. And I have not corroborated this yet, because I've worked to try to get a hold of him and be able to talk with him about his lecture, what we're going to do, and celebrate a little in advance. And what I got back was he did not have good cell service. I got to try his WhatsApp. I could, we tried in many ways. Because apparently, I can't corroborate this. I asked the provost to corroborate. All we know is he's out of the country. But the last message I had is he was climbing Mount Everest or something like that. So he's not here. But he did share a message back. He said, "Congratulations to Dr. Heidelberg. I'm thrilled to represent this community on the stage, and want to thank President Inch, the committee, my colleagues, my students, and MSU as a whole. We're a special institution where scholarship and student learning collide, in our case culminating with exciting cancer research. Tumors remain the great scourge of our time, but our work here at MSU has opened up new insights about how to unlock the full potential of the immune system by priming these key cells to prevent exhaustion and finish their cancer-killing quest. Equally, our graduate team figured out the math behind why this happens, something no one else in the field has discovered. But we did it here, right in Mankato. So please join me in a round of applause to congratulate Dr. Harter. I also want to congratulate all the faculty members who responded to the call for proposals this year. It really illustrates the richness of the study that goes on this campus, and also the engagement we have with our students and one another, as was demonstrated in this presentation. So as you know, the Douglas R. Moore Award applicants are interviewed and selected by a committee of past award recipients. And I want to thank this year's selection committee members, Philip Larson, Gwen Westerman, Becca Moan, and Mika Laidlaw, and the committee chair, David Charlin. And now, I will turn the program back over to Dr. DeHart to close out the event.
Thank you. Thank you, President Lynch. Let's give one more final round of applause for Dr. Heidelberg and Dr. Hart. Before we all make our way out to the Wamdi Wapaha Lounge, which is just outside and to my left for now, for a reception honoring Dr. Heidelberg, I'd like to mention just a few upcoming events. For many of you who are familiar with our campus, you know that April is a very busy time at MSU Mankato when we have a lot of wonderful, exciting things. I just want to highlight a few things related on the research front. On Monday, April 20th at 2 p.m., we have a Celebration of Excellence event. This year, not honoring only our distinguished faculty scholars, which we will do, but also recognizing those that have contributed to research scholarship and grantsmanship more broadly across our university. Also that same day, later in the evening, back in this location at 7 p.m. is the Kessel Lecture. And lastly, on Thursday, April 23rd, the Undergraduate Research Symposium takes place across our campus. So a lot of events. There are many more that I didn't get a chance to mention, but I'm really excited with the energy happening in April. Thank you for being with us this evening and for supporting the Douglas R. Moore Faculty Research Lecture Program. We hope you enjoy the reception and the opportunity to connect further with Dr. Heidelberg about our research. Thank you all. Have a good night.